Welcome, everyone. I'm sorry for the darkness of my screen. We are so glad that you are here with us for our third webinar in our series. This one is going to be with Rick Griffin, and he's going to be talking about being trauma-informed within our spheres of influence. For those who don't know me, my name is Angie Burleson, and I am the Executive Director for the Arizona ACEs Consortium. And Claire Luge, who is Executive Director of Prevent Child Abuse Arizona, was not able to be here with us today, but we have partnered together to bring everyone a webinar series on trauma-informed care. And what does that look like? Not only within organizations and within ourselves, but what does that look like within our community? And we are super excited to have Rick come and present to us today. I will stop sharing and introduce them so we can get moving. Rick is the Director of Training and Curriculum Development with Community Resilience Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to creating a citizenry conversant in trauma and resilience. He is also the board president of Prevent Child Abuse Arizona. Rick has committed his life to the education of others. After completing his master's degree in education, Rick became a founding member and executive director of Jubilee Leadership Academy, a therapeutic boarding school for struggling teens. Under Rick's leadership, Jubilee was World Magazine's 2014 winner of the Hope Award for Effective Compassion. Rick enjoys speaking to thousands of individuals from around the globe and is widely recognized for his work in trauma-informed care. Rick's vision to educate the masses about the impact of trauma inspired him to establish a national trauma and resilience conference that is held annually in Washington State. He is currently working on his latest passion, Purpose-Driven Play, a series of games designed to equip individuals with the skills to overcome adversity. Amid all of this, Rick still finds time for his highest priorities, his faith, his family, and his friends. And if you haven't had the chance to hear Rick speak before, you are in for a treat. Rick, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Angie. I certainly appreciate it. And good afternoon to all of you. I'm really excited about this opportunity to talk about a trauma-informed approach to relationships. What do relationships have to do with trauma, and what does trauma have to do with relationships, and talking a little bit about that. So it's exciting, and especially when I think about what relationships are and what they mean to us. And so really the objectives of this, and I love these big lips, it's about a kiss. It's about a kiss, because kiss is like drinking salt water, right? The more you get of it, the more thirsty you become for it. And it's like thinking about a KISS in our relationships. I use the acronym KISS in terms of knowledge, insight, strategies, and structures. So I'm going to paint the picture of what today will look like, what this hour will look like for us. In terms of that, we're going to talk about the knowledge. What does the science say about trauma? How does it, what does it work? How does it work? And can we look under the hood a little bit? And then hopefully we can gain some insight based on other individuals, based on the folks that we're in relationship with. Now that we know what the science says about trauma and what that looks like, and the individuals who are closest to it and the relationships we are, here's how it's impacting them. And in the end of our conversation today, I hope I have time for at least a few strategies on how do we really start to navigate that knowledge that we have and the insight we have of folks, and I hope to mitigate some of that trauma into a phenomenon that we call resilience. If at all possible, would love to have just a couple seconds of thoughts about, and how do we put this in place into our structures? How do we make this sustainable across all that we do? So this is the exciting thing that I love to bring, but it starts with the knowledge. It starts with the science. It starts with really, truly understanding with the brain. And then I use a model from Lisa Feldman Barrett. Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett is the one that really introduced me to this model of the predicting brain process. Many of you are familiar with the predicting brain and how that works, as it really is how the brain is working all the time. That the brain is constantly predicting based on our surroundings, what situations that we might be in. Without prediction, without the brain predicting, we would be so muddled, we wouldn't get anything done. We'd be so overwhelmed with the sensory input that's surrounding us. And so we talk about the predicting model of the brain. So I think it's important for us to hear and understand why predicting why the brain is doing what it's doing. And the important aspect is the brain is doing all this for its primary purpose. If I were to ask you, what is the primary purpose of the brain? Many of you would say, oh, it's to think. And the brain can do that. But its primary purpose is to really run the body, make sure that the heart is beating at the right beat. We know when it's beating too fast and it's pumping too much blood through our vessels, that's high blood pressure, hypertension. That can be problematic. We know if it's not pumping enough through our vessels, that's hypertension. That's problematic. We know when the oxygen levels are too high, that it's a problem. And if its oxygen levels are too low, if our liver is not producing the right amount of bile, all these wonderful factors, if the brain isn't regulating all of that, then our body isn't safe. And so in the service of keeping us safe, the brain releases its wonderful powers. And it starts with sensory input. Okay, so I'm going to walk you kind of through this process. It starts with sensory input. Scientists say that 11 million sensations are around us every second. Okay, that's all of our sensory inputs that involve things that we see, the things that we can hear, the things that we can taste and can smell, what our heart is doing, what our lungs are doing, what our liver is doing, what our kidneys are doing, every aspect that's going on us every second. 11 million sensations a second. But they say the average human can only keep track of about 40 of them, can only pay attention to really about 40 of them. So there's a lot of things that go on in our world that we can't even keep track of, that we can't even bear witness to. So when the sensory input comes in, we know that's our current experience. That's what's happening around us. But it's the things that we end up paying attention to that our brain is focused on in that moment. And we call that our statistical prediction. So our brain is making a prediction based on what the sensory input is, based on the things that we hear, based on the things that we see, based on the things that we smell and taste, everything that's going around us in any current situation. So if you were right now just saying, what's happening in my current situation right now? I'm hearing a voice come through, hopefully for some of you. I'm seeing a computer screen. I can see these slides. I can feel the pressure of my rear end on the seat that I'm on, maybe the back. These are the sensations that are happening around you. And your brain is making a statistical prediction saying, based on that, based on everything that's going on, here's the situation I think, and it makes an interpretation. And the two interpretations that I'm going to be working with, the first one, it's going to make an interpretation in the process of saying, everything that's going on, how do I keep you safe in that particular circumstance? Because it's going to assume that through its predictions, through all your past experience, it might be a threat, and it might be safe. It's kind of like that. You think about our ancestors on the Serengeti, long before there were houses and cars and internets and computers. Life was much simpler. We would see something in the distance. Is that something I can eat, or is that something that will eat me? And then we came to have an understanding of, oh, maybe it's something I can mate with, because that's all the things we had to be concerned about. And so our desire was to say, I better treat it like it's might eat me first, because if I make a mistake, if I think I can eat it, or if I think I can mate with it, but yet I find out I was wrong, we don't survive. And the brain's desire is for us to survive, the organism that it's operating to stay safe. So it's going to naturally lean in the direction of predicting a threat first. And so I follow this with a red arrow, and it's this system that happens. Now, this is what we call the threat prediction response that occurs. The body, when it predicts a threat, the body becomes unbalanced. And I think Nadine Burke-Harris says it best. If you want to know more about this, you absolutely got to hear her TED Talk. And she talks about when a bear jumps out of the forest at you, okay, that your body becomes unbalanced. It realizes, hey, this is not what I'm supposed to be experiencing. So sensory input runs a statistical prediction and says, ooh, based on this thing that you're seeing and the growl that you're hearing, and that you've got trees around you, you're in a forest, this is an animal, ooh, this might not be healthy for you. So it releases these chemicals, it dumps these chemicals. And we know these are the cortisol and adrenaline and these chemicals that course through our body. And it's great in a short term, because then we can respond. Fight, flight, or freeze is the mechanism we get into. And there's other people who have all other cute terms like feign and faint and all these other things. But really, there's a lot of things that we could do. But the body is saying, based on what I have, like my current experiences, and based on what I know about the past, this bear might not be the greatest thing for me. So cortisol and adrenaline gets released, and it helps you to be able to act upon that and either run or fight or doing whatever you need to do. But that's a huge drain. It starts to drain the energy if it happens all the time. It's great in the instant. But if she says when the bear comes home with you, for example, like if it's your parents or a caregiver or somebody you work with, and it's always around you, and this process is happening all the time, and the cortisol and adrenaline is flowing through your body all the time, she says, well, that's pretty harmful. And then it starts to drain on the rest of our systems because it wasn't designed to have that running constantly. So when your body's in the middle of a fight, it says, wait a minute, in the middle of this fight, we don't need our digestive system. Let's borrow some energy from that. We don't need our respiratory system. We don't need to be able to do things like really be able to breathe regularly. So let's start taking a little bit of energy to that, and even our reproductive system. Let's grab some energy from that, and it starts this cycle of just robbing the energy from the rest of the body. And then obviously we know that leads to even adult onset disease. And the worst part about it is now all the other sensory input is starting to be associated with threat. And so now we start, even the rustling of the leaves that we heard during that threat starts to trigger that process. And that becomes a threat. Sometimes we're walking down and we hear the rustling of the leaves. We remember, the last time I heard that was a bear. And so we have that response all over again. This is what we know that threat, that predicting of threat that the brain does in the service of trying to keep you safe is a phenomenon that we call trauma. That's what trauma is. And in any adversity, any response happens because we have some sensory input that triggers a prediction based on our experience, and we predict it as threat. But the good thing is that we have people in our life that don't always keep us feeling threat, that we also have the process of feeling safe. So sensory input occurs when we hear a sound, and our predictions that the brain is running now, it doesn't predict it always as threat. This is something I can eat or something I can mate with. It is something that says it is much safer. So it predicts now that you're in a safe place. And it has this process now that it starts to predict that you're safe. And now you're balanced. Your whole body, the interoception, what your body's doing on the inside, it's running at optimal levels. Your brain, your heart's not beating too fast. Your lungs aren't producing too much oxygen. Everything is running in balance. Science calls it homeostasis. It keeps it as a balance. But still, there's a chemical dump. It's not cortisol and adrenaline like it was in the threat response. Now, these are things like dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin, what they call the feel-good hormones and chemicals that are being released. And these chemicals, instead of driving us to fight or to flight, it helps us to engage socially with people. As a matter of fact, they say that oxytocin is at highest levels in the body when for a female after the birth of the second child. It's like nature's way of saying, I want to make sure you know that you can connect with a new child just like you could with the first one. So let me give you an extra dose of oxytocin to be able to engage you just as deeply with your next child and your next child. And so it's nature's way of keeping us engaged with one another so that we can continue to thrive as an organism. And that process, those chemicals actually replenish energy. They often actually call it the rest and digest system. Our body is resting and it's feeling great. It's being rewarded for being at balance. And so the sensory input that's associated becomes safe as well. So when we have a relationship in that fun, it's like I had in that earlier screen, if you were to get a nice little soft peck on the cheek from a partner, for somebody that you care about, it's going to be associated with many other sensations as well. And I still remember. Now I'm pretty old, so it's a long time ago. But my first kiss. Maybe you remember your first kiss. And it's the smell of bubble yum chewing gum that I still remember. She was chewing bubble yum, and anytime I would smell that, decades later, still has that warmth, that prediction of safety. Because safety can be triggered just like threat can be triggered. And so this is the knowledge that we need to have in relationships. This is what's happening. So I'm going to break this down in terms of what this looks like. So it's that current experience. Our sensory input is our current experience. So when you're in a relationship, that's your current experiences. Anything that you have, anything that what the person says, what the person does, what you're seeing and feeling, all those are your current experiences. And it's now being evaluated based on your past experiences. Okay? And it's deciding, that statistical prediction saying, is that good or is it bad? If it was perceived as a threat, then you're going to go down that cycle and you may be triggered into threat. If your past experience that you're comparing it to is good, then you might be triggered into a safety spot. And that's really the process of trauma-informed care, is how do we go about shifting the threat response to safety responses? Because the threat response is the phenomenon known as trauma, right? And the safety response is this phenomenon known as resilience. So how do we turn trauma, adverse experiences, into resilient experiences? And that's the brain predicting threat versus the brain predicting safety, all based on our past experience. That's the hinge. That's the point in which it determines. The sensory input occurs on both sides, and the statistical prediction, depending on what you predict, it will decide in what we really call it our interpretation. That's why interpretation of events is, because our body starts to say, well, how am I interpreting this current experience based on all the knowledge I have about my past experiences and what I think about the world? And I'll interpret it as either safe or either a threat. And that's why we say trauma-informed care. And for years, it was saying, it's not about what's wrong with you, it's about what happened to you. Well, what happened to you are your past experiences, right? And so science would really say it's even deeper than what happened to you. It's about how you interpreted what happened to you. Because the people can have the same thing happen to them. They can have similar past experiences, and we can all have gone through the pandemic at the same time, but how we interpreted it was drastically different. And I usually use the situation of having two conjoined twins that are identical in their DNA. If I were feeding them lunch, one would say, "Oh, Dad, thank you so much. This is so wonderful." While the other one might say, "Well, why do you always serve her first?" So they had the same past experience. Their current experience was me feeding them lunch. Their interpretation was based on their past experiences. And so they interpret it differently. One might interpret it as a threat and one might interpret it as safety. I mean, I'm the same person. I'm doing the same thing to them, but they're interpreting my actions in vastly different ways. So it's even beyond what happened to them. And I love Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah. Everybody loves Oprah. Their book is wonderful. And I just think that I would have liked to have seen, and maybe this is their second book coming, they'll include Rick Griffin on, I doubt that'll happen, but wouldn't it be great if they would say, well, it's not just even about what happened to you, it's about how you interpreted what happened to you. Because once your body is interpreted as safe or a threat, then those chemicals start to be released. And that's the effect that it has on us. So our interpretation will change the effect our body and how it's processing and how our brain is being developed after that based on how we interpret it. And then the effect is what causes behavior. The bottom things are behavior. And so those who you are working with challenging people, that's why I love one of the courses I talk really deeply about this, is once we know that all these things come before behavior, it's a lot easier to address behavior. It's a lot easier to work with challenging behavior when you know where it comes from. When you know that the combination, the integration of our current experience and our past experiences, and then how we're interpreting really starts to control and helps us understand how behavior is generated so we can work with it a little better. But even the behavior of those that we're in a relationship with now becomes crystal clear, becomes so important. Because as we start to look at this phenomenon, we start to see that that sensory input in those statistical predictions, they are the things, circle that for you, these are the things that really matter. In a relationship, if you were to understand this, if you were to understand and really be paying attention that the sensory input, their current experiences are now being connected to their past experience, you're saying, based on everything that I'm experiencing right now, what does my past say this is? Is it a helpful, a safe experience, or am I predicting a threat? That's important information to have, all based on whether it's our current or current and past experience. So truly trauma-informed in a relationship helps you by understanding how their current experiences are being interpreted through that algorithm, through that statistical prediction of their past experience, because the brain is predictive. It's phenomenal. Dr. Feldman Barrett talks about even an apple. The current experience. If I had an apple in my hand, a nice a red with green, a little bit of green in there as it's kind of blending together in that shade, and that would be my current experience. Now, my past experience would be I've had an apple before. I know what an apple is. I have that context of what an apple is, and that's important. You have to know what an apple is, because if you've never seen an apple, your predicting brain doesn't know what it is, and that's called prediction blindness. And that's the experience of learning. It's something new. It's novel, and we don't know what it is. But if we know what it is, we're starting to run an algorithm based on what that apple is. I bet I know what it's going to taste like. And so our brain sends out a prediction to the rest of our body. It says, hey, you've got this apple and you're getting ready to eat it. And it's already releasing some chemicals to break down the sugars in that apple. It doesn't wait. Even a better example would be, what if you've ever been really parched? Okay? Your current experience is that you're super, super thirsty, the hot desert sun, hot, and there's a cold bottle of water there. And you can't wait to snap off that cap and drink that cold bottle of water. But based on your past experience, your body is already responding to that cold water. And when that water just hits the back of your throat, it's really going to start doing a lot of work right away. But in reality, that water doesn't hit your bloodstream and have some real impact on your body for about 20 minutes. But because our brain is predicting, it's had a past experience with water in our body when we're thirsty, it's already going to be responding, knowing what it's going to do, and keeps us feeling like, yep, that was exactly what I needed, that bottle, that shot of water in that moment. Even though it hasn't had any true effects inside your bloodstream and won't for about 20 minutes, you're going to be acting as though it does and feel like you're satiated even long before you are, because of the power of the predicting brain. And when we can understand, when we have this knowledge and insight into people, and saying that they've got a past experience that maybe it's different from mine, they're interpreting their current experience. Maybe the current experience is for somebody in a relationship with they've got somebody who is using a particular tone of voice. Okay? So this is really my story with my 10-year-old. Okay? He uses this tone of voice, this really high-pitched tone of voice, and it sounds so whiny to me, and it just drives me crazy that current experience of that high voice. And based on my past experience, that's him being whiny and not being grateful. And so I'm running that algorithm like, oh no, here we go again. And I'm already triggered based on my past experience with my son and his whiny voice. And so it's already predicting a little bit of a threat. Now, in his small, high voice, he might be saying, Daddy, I love you so much. But my threat has already started being predicted. It's a good thing I can shift quickly in those moments. But because of my prediction and threat, I might even predict his words of, Daddy, I love you so much, as being manipulative and saying, okay, what does he want from me now? Because I'm under that threat prediction. And the sensory input is associated with other threat. And even kind and gentle words may have been interpreted in that moment as a threat. He may have intended it to be safe. But because of my past experiences, interpreting my current experiences, I predict as a threat. And too often, this is what happens in a relationship, is that we have this current experience and we're running it through our algorithm of all our past experiences. And it typically means, have I been in a relationship before? And did that relationship, how did they treat me? When this happened, how did it go on? Now, when it's a wonderful thing, if that high voice, I heard that high voice is Daddy, I love you, I would always just assume that that's what's coming next. My brain would be predicting safety. But it's based on the statistical predictions, my past experience that say, that's a whiny voice, that's a threat, something else is happening. And even when it's not, I'm seeing through that lens. I'm treating in that moment my relationship as a threat. And I absolutely understand that I would need to shift those threat predictions to safety predictions. But how to do it starts with an understanding of that all my current experience right now is being compared to my past experience. And when we're aware, we can do something different. And that's what really is the key to all this today is I want to talk to you about being aware, self-awareness. Maybe I'm going to give you a chance to be active in the chat box for me real quick. Type in a Y for yes or an N for no. How many of you have taken a speech class? Okay, a Y for yes, N for no. How many of you have taken a speech class? Okay, good. Thank you for participating. Okay, and for all of you who said yes, type in a Y for yes or an N for no if you had your speech videotaped. Okay. So we've had some people who've had some videotape, some haven't a videotape. But if you've had a videotape and you went back and you saw the videotape, do you remember when you saw that first, you're like all those you're like, oh my gosh, you became self-aware. You became aware that you do something and it empowered you to do something different. So in your next speech, you could be more aware and do something different. Larry, thanks. I love you guys' comments, by the way. It's hysterical. But well, because we know now, you know the number one fear in America is fear of public speaking. So we know that what Larry is saying is absolutely real. But that's what happens. Once we are self-aware, then we have the ability to do something different. So that's what insight is all about. We have the knowledge. We have to have the knowledge that this is happening in the brain, okay? And now you have that knowledge. Your brain is predicting all the time in the service of keeping you safe. Your brain is predicting. Okay? It's not a malicious thing. It's not, and I would love at another time to talk about how this impacts race and how and some of our other real big issues in our society, but it's doing it in the service of keeping you safe. But it does have some outcomes sometimes that aren't always favorable, because it will naturally predict sometimes a threat to try to keep us safe, to make sure that we are able to respond a lot quicker when it might not actually be a threat. And so in relationships, we need to understand that the knowledge that the individual, their brain is predicting, and they're using their algorithm based on all their past experiences. We were probably not the first person in their relationship. So that's incredibly important for us to understand. So, and it would be great if you have any questions. I know that there is a system there that you can ask questions. I believe, Angie, if you're still there to agree, if folks are asking any questions, is the most appropriate place to place that in the question and answer spot. I think that's easier than the chat box, because the chat box can go way too fast. We might miss some. I think the question and answer really saves those for us. But I really want you to, if there are any questions about the knowledge, remember the KISS framework is knowledge has to come first. We have to understand what the brain is actually doing. So if you have any questions about the knowledge, I think this is important because it leads right into the insight. Having insight into that people's brain is predicting, and it's predicting based on what they've experienced before. And sometimes it's the default is predicting a threat in order to keep us safe. So we're not going to blame folks for default for having a threat about who we are and what we bring to that relationship in that moment, because that's what it's doing naturally in order to keep themselves safe. We're going to be more curious about the statistical predictions. They may be predicting a threat, but I want to be curious and not furious, is what we talk about in some of our other courses. Be curious. What has happened in their past relationships that's making that hard for them now? That's making that helping them to predict a threat now. Instead of being angry with the behavior that comes out of that threat prediction, it's just to say, I wonder what caused it. Because I know the pivoting point is the statistical prediction, their past experience. what has gone on in their past that is causing them to see what I'm doing, what I'm trying to do for them in the present as a threat? Be curious, not furious. So that's what we want to look at, is how do we do that? How do we use that knowledge and now gain some insight into our relationships to say, okay, my guess is they probably had some past experiences that's causing them to predict a threat now. So Angie, thank you for typing that out. That's a beautiful quote. Hey, everybody hang on to those words, because that's what you need to do to make relationships successful. I have to be more curious and less furious. Curious about their past experiences and why they're predicting threat. What's happening in those 11 million sensations every second? What's going on that they're predicting some of those as a threat? And really, it helps you to say, hey, it's not about me. It's what the acronym we call Q-tip. Quit taking it personally. It's not about you. It's about their past experiences and how they're interpreting those. You may have been a part of their past experiences, sure, but you can't control how they interpreted it. You couldn't control in that moment, at least in the past, you couldn't control that they predicted the threat versus predicted the safety. Now, there are some things, we'll talk about that in terms of strategies. There's some things that you can do to educate people's statistical predictions. And that's really what it's all about. This is where even bias comes from, racial bias and all, and some of the unconscious bias. It all comes from that statistical prediction of how, based on what we've known, what's happened to us, how are we predicting that? And so, yes, you don't have to just say, hey, there's nothing I can do. You can say, yes, I can now start educating their statistical predictions. That means I can help them to start reframing their past experiences and learning to see current experiences from a safety prediction instead of from a threat prediction. Angie, if there are any questions, let's take a minute or two to help address any. So Angie, if you could do me a favor, if somebody is asking any questions, can you read for me a question that folks might be asking? I know there's at least one in the chat, but I want to see if there's any in the Q&A first.
Yeah, there's two questions so far. There's none in the Q&A, but a question that I had answered earlier, but I would love to have you answer it for everyone is, can the reverse happen, that the brain begins to interpret unsafe / threat experiences as safe?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what we worry about, especially with individuals on the spectrum that might be processing things differently, that their past experiences, their statistical prediction is now wired to start thinking that this is a safe event when it really isn't, and that's what we get most concerned about. That's why we in our systems we raise up to people to think about terms as stranger danger, because we're trying to keep people safe. That if I can help you see strange people as dangerous, then I can keep you safe if there's a threat. But as we know, not all strangers are dangerous. And so but some of them are. So you absolutely can be predicting safety when there is a threat, and you can be predicting threat when there's safety. And then you can be predicting accurate. You can predict a threat when there's a threat, and you can predict safety when there's a safety. So all of them are relevant. The key is, how do we help really shape the statistical predictions so that it becomes more accurate? It's the difference between what we call error prediction and error correction. Okay? If the predictive correction is when something is a threat and it's confirmed, and so all the sensory input is accurate, assessing it. Yes, this is a threat, and so now I have a corrected error prediction. It's like when you bite into the apple, your body assumes that it's going to be sweet, a little tart, and so it releases the chemicals that break down that sugar. But if you bite into it and it's a sour apple, now your body has to readjust. And so we do have systems that help us to readjust, but we also need external systems. We need trusted adults, for example, in a kid's situation, a trusted adult that can help clear up the information. Hey, I don't want you walking out there thinking that all strangers are dangerous, but I also don't want you just going up to strangers randomly, because some are. So let's use a different term, perhaps. Instead of stranger danger, let's use go ask a trusted adult. So when you see something that is different and that you might qualify as a little strange, instead of thinking it's dangerous, come to a trusted adult and we'll evaluate it and we'll talk about it together. And that can help shape that response of how they start to learn to have their predictions more closely related to what's actually occurring. Okay? So hopefully that addresses it for you.
Yeah, that was great. Another question in the Q&A is, in seeing the flowchart for the predictive brain process, this looks similar to the vagal nerve response theory. Am I making the correct connections here?
Yes, you are. But remember, the vagus nerve is a bundle of nerves, first of all, and it is it's communicating based on all the optic nerves. All the optic nerves are their design is to communicate information from peripherals. Okay, our eyes collect information and it runs through our brain, and so it gets interpreted. Our ears do the same thing. Our nose, all of our senses, all of our organs, all the organs that are peripherals externally are collecting data, sending it to the brain. The vagal nerve is also collecting data, sending it to the brain for interpretation. So what's critically important is to understand that it's a channel for communication. That the 100 billion neurons in the brain are actually making the interpretation, and it's determining even how the message it sends back through the vagus nerve. Sometimes, in terms of the people who look at the vagal nerve and the polyvagal theory, is assuming that nerve bundle is a two-way channel operated by the mechanism, as opposed to just a channel of information that's being interpreted somewhere else, and that interpretation is sending messages back through that. And so yes, it can be adjusted and manipulated and changed and massaged and lots of things that can help that signal be more clear. But what's actually making the signal, the actual source of the information, are the 100 billion neurons. And so that's important to consider. Looking under the hood, let's look at are the 100 billion neurons and how they are predicting and sending that message through. So it's more of a focus of let's look at the source as opposed to the channel of communication, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's certainly not. I am absolutely a big fan. I've read lots about the vagus nerve and polyvagal theory. It's all wonderful. Lots of helpful information, but all theories are incomplete to some degree. Some are inaccurate, but all are incomplete. We just want to try to get as complete as possible by understanding what they call reductionism science, and that let's get to the source as often as we can. So we're not working on the symptoms, we're looking at the source of things.
Yes, I love that. I think one more before you go on, but what is our responsibility when talking with acquaintances or strangers to monitor our words so that they don't get activated?
That's a value question. Unfortunately, that's not a fact question. So it really depends on how you were raised and what you think is appropriate. And for some people, keeping themselves safe is their higher priority. For other people in other cultures, sometimes the greater good is higher than the individual. So those types of value questions are really based on an individual and the culture and the environment in which they're acting on. So what I can say is that if you believe that you as an individual is your highest priority, then I think that you should act as though you have to keep yourself safe, and assume that things might harm you first until you find out more information. And then once you find out more information, I hope that you do recorrect. And that's great. But if your higher priority is the greater good, maybe you might respond a little different, and that you think that an entity that's trying to harm you by loving it first, by responding to it positively first, may change its intention. But those are all values, and I certainly couldn't say what anyone should do in any given moment, but recognize that what you do may have some impact on what the other person does as well. You are not operating in a vacuum. Your response is a part of, or can be a part of the total picture. So I do think that some of us do feel some responsibility in how we respond in order to make things work more effectively. But I also recognize the term, I guess I should say, is variation is the norm. There is no one right way to do anything for anybody, because everybody's a little different. But yes, I'm glad that people are considering that there may be some responsibility we have in these interactions. And there's no one, well, I won't, I don't want to dive into the weeds in this, but we do have some tendencies to believe that there is only one right way, that type of thinking, and I start looking at that as really supremacy thinking, that there's only one right way. That has some consequences, and in our society, it certainly has had some consequences. So we want to recognize that there may be, that it's a value question, and people have different values and may approach it different ways. Any other thoughts, questions? If not, I want to go into, so this is the knowledge, and thank you for asking about this knowledge. It's important stuff. I love talking about these things. I can go on for hours, but I want to talk a little bit about how the insight about this all could be important for us. Okay, insight into the human animal, and these two figures. The top figure, it's a stick bug, and it has made some adaptations in its life to look like its environment in the service of keeping it safe. If you saw this out in the woods, you would literally might think it's a stick, and so that's how it keeps itself safe. It's adapted itself to its environment in the service of keeping it safe. Safety is a primary function of most organisms, because without thriving, in a sense, and surviving, the organism doesn't exist, and the whole purpose of the organism is probably to exist for some period of time at least. So this is how the insect does it. Now on the bottom, you have a male peacock. Now this seems to be antithetical a little bit. So wait a minute, that's not going to disguise it from any of its predators. A peacock's a pretty meaty bird, and predators would love to sink its teeth in that to some degree. And this isn't going to help. These big bright feathers in the middle of its environment, it's going to attract everything. But it does it because it needs to attract connection. This is a mating signal, since it realizes that one of its important parts of its life is to mate. And so I've got to have a mechanism that helps me to mate. Just surviving isn't good enough. It is actually risking some of its safety for connection. And so these, I think, are really important insights for people, to recognize that sometimes people are driven from their networks that are telling them survive at all costs, keep myself safe at all costs, change. From a racial concept, we use terms like code switching, do whatever we can to keep ourselves safe. And others are looking at that and say, well, that's not good enough. You also have to connect with people. So you can't be keeping yourself safe in a way that turns you away from other people. Because they would say, no, because connection is important too. And that's the insight we need to have. Are people responding? In our relationships, are they responding to us because they're trying to keep themselves safe? Or are they responding in a way that's trying to connect with us? And the greater insight we have into them, the easier it is for us to be a lot more curious and a lot less furious. We're not upset with the things that they do. You certainly wouldn't get upset with the stick bug for trying to keep itself safe, because clearly predators would find it if it looked differently. But do you blame a male peacock for having a desire to mate and to connect, even at maybe to the cost of its safety? And those are the things that I know I started to ask myself when I've got a teenage son, and I worked with teenagers for most of my adult life. And often I get that I am totally overgeneralizing, and I get this, but to a large degree, when I'm working with adolescents and teenagers, I often question, why are you willing to risk your safety just for people to like you? And I think, well, that's what humans do. That's clearly what the peacock is doing. So instead of judging that, why don't I just try to understand and have some insight into that? Saying, okay, in this moment, for whatever reason, this is highly important. Connection is very, very important. And yes, people may be willing to jeopardize their safety for connection. And that's not for me to say, well, that's not a good thing to do. I just need to understand, have some insight that is what's occurring. And I think this is a really helpful process for us in terms of insight. So I want you to think about all these in the service of keeping you safe. There are some strategies, and some of the strategies that we talk about are, we have what we call our course 2 trauma supportive service. We call the acronym CAREER. make a career out of fostering the resilience in the lives of others. And if you're going to have relationships, in your relationships, whether it's an intimate partner relationship with just two people, maybe it's a nuclear family relationship, maybe it's a workplace relationships, maybe it's a place of worship relationships, maybe it's a residential, geographical, community relationship. Regardless of the nature of the relationship, there are some strategies that we think are helpful. There's some major domains and strategies that can be helpful in building resilience and helping people to stay safe and stay connected, so that they can thrive in that. And so we term them, so the career acronym is for celebration station, affirmation station, regulation station, expectation station, education station, and restoration station. I guess I didn't need to say those because you probably can read. I apologize for that. But the celebration station, for example, some of the strategies that we use in here, we have what we call the first rights, the category of first rights. And we use the term first rights simply because I was frustrated with the fact when I learned what last rights were. I learned what last rights were, and I was like, what? Why would we wait until the end of someone's life to really honor them? So I'm thinking, if I have any control over this at any point in my time, I'm going to call them first rights. And I want people to honor people from the very first day of life, throughout life, and not wait until the end of life to really honor somebody. So in the celebration station, we have these categories called first rights. And like one of them, and you see this around a lot of times, in your relationship, if you really want to use a trauma-informed lens and build resilience in a relationship, have a way of honoring people when you see them and when you leave them. A friend of mine had gave me the term to use. He called it the aloha rights, because of how he's a native Hawaiian, and how he explained to me the power of the word aloha. Because I told him, oh, I know it means hello and goodbye, and he says it's so much more than that, Rick. If you're going to use the term aloha, understand the meaning of this word. And that's why I don't want to appropriate the word aloha. And he said, no, I just want you to understand. And he said, it's from a polytheistic culture. He said, it's like the God in me honoring the God in you when I see you and when I leave you. And I thought, well, that's pretty powerful. So I want people to, in celebration, there's got to be some way of when we see each other, we have that, sometimes we say hello. The military has a salute, right? It's a way of honoring people. I remember growing up, the Flintstones. This probably shows my age. Probably nobody on here remembers the Flintstones, but in the Flintstones, Barney and Fred were members of the Loyal Order of Water Buffaloes, and they had this little greeting, this little handshake of celebrating each time they met another member of the Loyal Water Buffaloes. And I thought that was so cool that there was this way of celebrating when we see each other. For those of us here in the Valley, during the Fiesta Bowl, when the Fiesta Bowl was downtown Tempe, and you had different teams from different part of the country walking down downtown Tempe, and I was there when Oklahoma was in town, and I remember when Oklahoma was playing Georgia, and so the Oklahoma fans, when they would walk down, and they would see another Oklahoma shirt, somebody would yell "Boomer," and somebody else would yell "Sooner," and I thought that was so cool. They were just yelling at each other down the street. It's a way to celebrating who they were because of this relationship they had. And then the Georgia fans would bark at each other. Woof, 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 woof. I thought that was pretty cool. I think all families, all relationships should have some way of acknowledging when they see each other and honor that. Something maybe special, maybe it's a handshake, maybe it's a salute, maybe it's something that says we want to honor each other. And that's just one of we also have what we call the missed you celebrations, that everybody in a relationship should have some way of honoring when we miss each other, so that nobody walks out of a relationship thinking, I wonder if I would be missed. No, have a celebration, have a routine, have something that says, I miss you, and let it be known. For example, in schools, when I go to schools and consult with schools, I tell schools, don't have absent slips, have welcome back slips. Let them know that they were missed when they were gone. Yes, you need to track attendance, but can't you do that through welcoming them back to being, hey, you are part of our school family. When you're gone, we're not complete without you. We're not just going to call it an absence slip. Why are you absent? We want to say welcome back. And can you find ways to celebrate the fact that your family is back together, as opposed to just tracking their absence? So it's strategies like that we have. And then the affirmation station. This is a way to affirm the relationship, and we talk more deeply about this in some of our other courses. But it's a way to affirm those relationships, make sure that people know that, hey, I'm in a relationship with you. I've got your back. It matters. I remember I sent a text even today to my partner, and I told her, I said, yeah, out of the many years, decades now that we have been married, uh, I want to let her know that I've got her back. That this time in our life now, I'm so glad she's just accepted a new job, and she gets to really shine. She gets a chance to use her gifts to shine. And so I had to send that text message to let her know I have to use strategies, any strategy I can, to affirm the relationship, to make sure she knows I have your back. And there's commercials out there. I mean, I'm watching Monday Night Football. There's these great commercials of all of these people in different situations saying, "I've got your back." What a powerful way to affirm. And there's lots of different strategies that we can use and we can put in place. In our course, we talk about 30 of them, 30 different strategies that we talk about inside of this career acronym, to really start to foster resilience inside of our relationships, and how important it is. I remember during the pandemic, I was excited with my kids. Let's go out there and let's ride on the sidewalk to people walking by, let them know, hey, we're thinking about you, hope you're okay. We found out that dry erase markers rub off of windows really easy. So we started writing backwards messages on our front window. So our neighbor, people walking by would say, hey, we're thinking about you. I hope you're doing okay. Just strategies to affirm the relationships with people, letting them know that you're important, that they're important. And then the regulation station, and I could talk another several hours just on the regulation station, because there's a misnomer about regulation, that calm is in the middle. Remember I talking about homeostasis? That's the science that they call that balance. But everybody thinks that people need to learn to calm down. No, sometimes people need to learn to calm up too. Well, yeah, some of you need a cup of coffee before you get going in the morning. That's calming up. And so we have to understand that even how we regulate comes with variation, that there's no one size fits all strategy. You have to have some strategies when people need to calm down, and you also have some strategies when people need to calm up. You need some strategies when people, they say, well, exercise is a great way to regulate. Well, for some people during some times, but sometimes having no exercise, resting is regulating for some people. It's about knowing when people need what that really helps to regulate. It's not just throwing a strategy at them and helping it works. So there's some science and understanding how to even help people regulate. And so those strategies are important to us. Expectation station, making sure that there's some expectations before meetings. And there's some strategies we call the comfort agreements. Some people talk about ground rules, but here are the expectations that we are going to have. Here are the agreements that we're going to have, because it keeps us safe in this relationship. And my partner and I, when we were married, we should have talked more about it, but now we're coming to some understanding still of there's some expectations we should have had. We should have talked about social media and what's okay and what's not okay in our marriage when it comes to social media. And I know that and she would have appreciated having a really good understanding of, well, here's what I'm going to be doing on social media, here's what you're going to be doing, and here's what's okay. Have some expectations that we can agree on. Those kind of strategies are helpful to keep the family strong when you have those kind of expectations, when they're in place. The education station, these are the strategies that we talk about in terms of how do we learn about things that are important. When we use that KISS analogy, that knowledge is first, and at least in our relationship, we talked about, let's learn the science. Let's learn what's underneath hood. And one of the clear things that we're trying to educate ourselves about is memory. Is how does memory work? Because memory and how we think it works is not how it works. And our relationship has been impacted by that, because it's like, wait a minute, we both experienced the same thing, but we didn't remember it the same way. And honestly, there are times when I literally thought my partner was lying to me. And I know there's times that she thought I was lying to her, because we remembered something different. But when we had an education stage, when we started learning about memory, and when we now know there's 11 million sensations that happen every given second, we only pay attention to 40 of them. I said, Leanne probably thinks of 40 than I'm thinking about. And when we know that, now it can help us in our relationship to say, okay, she's not lying. I'm not lying. I'm recalling 40 different things than she was. And just have some understanding that it's very possible, out of 11 million sensations that happen every second, that it's very possible that we remembered a whole different set of them. And once you know that, it can help the relationship connect even more. So I have about 5 minutes, but I just wanted to understand that this last one is really important to me. And I could go on for hours with this, but the strategies in here are so incredible. If you want to have and understand relationships through a trauma-informed lens, you have to have some system of restoration, because things will go wrong. You will cause a threat response to another human being. As a matter of fact, humans, because we've evolved so well in our environments to take care of, the top of the food chain and everything as humans are, the number one threat to a human being is another human being. So the most likely that you are going to be threatened and feel a threat is from another human being. But also, the greatest source of safety comes from another human being. That's the value of relationship. That's what we need to understand. And so when those relationships, because they have the capacity to be both a threat and both safety, we have to have a plan. We have to have some strategies. What are we going to do when somebody predicts threat, when the relationship needs to be restored? And some of you may have attended some of my other courses. I've done one on the art of the apology. That's an important aspect to have in a relationship. Restoring love, trust, and safety. That's another strategy that we talked about in terms of restoring what happens in a relationship. All these strategies are incredibly important in the concept of relationship. So I've only got about 3 minutes left, so I wanted to make sure I left a little time for questions. But just so you're aware, just want to put this screen up as we ask questions. There are several things that we do in our organization as Community Resilience Initiative. Lots of them are involved around acronyms, as you can see, but they're science-focused solutions. How do we use the best of science in our practices? And we talked about a few of those today in terms of the career, but there's others that I would love the opportunity to tell you much more about. But I just want to make sure I put the screen, because addressing trauma, one of the things we do in terms of roles, that third one down, everything you know about behavior is false. That's our what we call our trauma practitioners, our course 3. It's all those. The false skills are the executive function skills, that the cognitive control. When those are compromised, that it can lead to challenging behavior, and how you address that. Stamping resilience into your brain. That's an acronym we use about how do you create those safe predictions, move threat predictions and safe predictions, and stamp them into your brain so they can stay a long time. So instead of thinking about PTSD, we've got another term that we'll be talking about in terms of, no, I'm going to help you trigger positive experiences, because the brain can do that. And that's exciting. And then, of course, for me, bias is really important. How we look at that, and so we use the acronym MyFace, and these are illusions. These are things that happen. The way the brain does things in the service of keeping us safe, the brain does some things that really comes off as bias and can be detrimental to other people. So how do we understand that, and how do we prevent that? So wanted to make sure, let you know about those things. Got a couple seconds for maybe a question or two. Angie, did you come across any other questions, any comments out there that you think I need to address?
No, so there's not been any more questions. So the kudos are starting to come in for you. There was an article that I had read a couple months ago, and I'm going to send it to you, but it was talking about how we're looking at the research wrong as to the effects of events on children, and that we need to look at their perception of the event and not the event itself. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have to find that article. So I found it, and I will send it to you, because he was like, we're doing our science completely wrong. And he had two different examples. And one was a little girl who had a 2-parent household. They middle income. They moved to another bigger house in the same neighborhood. She never left the school system, none of that stuff. And another child who his mother was incarcerated. He lived with his grandmother, and he was very poor. And the event of moving for that little girl was so stressful and so traumatic on her that it showed in years later, right? In the behaviors, and that little boy never perceived what his environment was in the poverty and with his mother being incarcerated as a stressful or negative event. And he didn't have those same things. And he's like, we're doing this all wrong. And so it made me think of that. Thank you all for joining us today. I would love to sit and listen to Rick talk for another 6 or 7 hours, and would love to have him come back. Simone has put the link for the survey to get your certificate of attendance if you would like in the chat. And I am going to put a few links in the chat. One is the ACES Consortium meeting. The quarterly meeting is upcoming in November. On the exact same day, we have the last webinar of our 4-part series, which is Journey of a Trauma-Informed Organization. And the Hope House is going to talk about what that journey looked like and is looking like for them. We all know that trauma-informed is a process, not a destination. And they are going to talk about that if you'd like to register for that webinar. Our 8th annual ACES Summit is upcoming in December. Prevent Child Abuse Arizona will be doing the pre-conference on December 14th. We have Donna Jackson Nakasawa, who is our opening keynote on the 15th. And on the 16th, we have Laura Porter, Eisner Health, and Chuck Price, all talking about different ways that we can become a trauma-informed community, trauma-informed self, trauma-informed leader, trauma-informed organization. And then we will be doing networking sector breakouts to identify action plans for our individual sectors, and taking all of the information from the summit and detailing specific personal action plans and community action plans that you would like to close out our seminar. And then and if you missed any of the webinars before, or you'd like to see Rick speak again, which I will again, we have all of the replays are posted at azaces.org/webinars. Thank you so much for joining us, Rick. Thank you. I appreciate you and your insights, your wisdom, and just the manner in which you present. And I hope everyone has a very great day.
Thank you, Angie.